Aha.
Okay, that explains it.
Good afternoon. So at this point, you may want to take your seats. So we can start in about -1 minute. Can you also close the doors? Can you close the doors? Is anybody hearing me? Hello? Seems to work. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so good afternoon. Welcome to the core working group. We have 2 meetings this week. The chairs try to be frugal on requesting time, and that probably was a mistake. So we have a 2-hour slot today and a 1-hour slot on Thursday. Now the good thing is that nobody is coming after us in the 1-hour slot in Thursday. So unless you care about rats, and some of us do care about rats, maybe we can just have an informal hallway discussion in this room after the official end of the working group meeting. Okay, I'm Carsten Burmann. I'm running this group. There are various mailing lists and so on this page. As usual, we assume people have read the drafts. So we will do very little introduction here and very much discussion of detailed points that we need to reach closure on. And we are running under some IPR principles. And since it's Monday, I'm showing this slide for a couple of seconds. So there are some policies that apply here. And among those are you are being recorded, number 1. And number 2, if you know about a patent claim that would read on a technology you want to talk about here, you either have to tell us or you can choose not to talk about the technology. Now the second part, knowing about a patent claim and not talking about that, is frowned upon, but it's not something we can completely outlaw here in the procedures. If you want to read the details of the procedure, there should be somewhere here, but they aren't. Great. So this is the new version of the Node-REL slide, and you have gotten enough pointers with your registration materials. Okay, let's look at the agenda. We had a number of last-minute moves here, and even this list isn't quite final because we cannot have the COMA CoreConf part right at the start because some people are stuck in another meeting. So we actually will, after a short introduction, we'll start with Oscar. Is Göran here? I hope he will be within 10 minutes. And then we go into a resource directory, and then we can either do SNML or CoreConf as the time permits. And on Thursday, we have lots of small items, and you can see we have started measuring the time here in minutes and stopping at 1834 and things like that. It's not going to work in any way, but okay, so there are a number of housekeeping drafts at the moment, for instance, that we just need to tick off. There are some other working group drafts that always receive short shrift. Is Michael here? Not yet. If we miraculously do have time at the end, we can talk about the congestion control draft that is today being discussed at the ANRW workshop, where all of us would like to be right now instead of here. Yeah, I'm not sure that we actually will make it. So are there any other changes we need to apply to this heavily bashed already agenda? This room is really useless. Doesn't make any sense at all. Okay. Okay, then I have a couple of advertisements. First of all, we have a relationship with the DNSSD working group, which is meeting on Thursday morning, and I understand one draft that we will touch on today will be discussed on Thursday as well. And of course, there are dozens of other IoT-related working groups meeting this week. I always send an agenda. I don't want to highlight all of them, but I really wanted to highlight the DNSSD here. Also, one thing I want to mention is that we have a number of customers in other SDOs, other standards development organizations, and we try to keep in contact with them. And one of those is OCF, and we actually will have a coordination call with them. This is usually an affair for very few people. We only have 12 seats in the room where we do this. So if you want to join, please ask the chairs. We definitely want to accommodate everybody who wants to do that, but we may not be able to. Okay, quick status on two documents that are in ISG processing. So one of those is links JSON. That is actually something that started in 2012 with CBOR variants added 2015. So you would think by 2018 it might be time to finally complete this. So this document already left the working group and was submitted to the ISG more than a year ago, but we got a lot of feedback from the other web-related groups in the IETF. So we decided to do some refocusing, and that refocusing is still ongoing. And one reason for this is that we are finishing the work on the resource directory right now, and we want to make sure that everything fits together. So we hope that the people interested in this will meet in the hallways this week. We already had some discussions in the T2TRG Wishy hackathon and this weekend, and we might be finally in a position to fix the remaining details. So, of course, after the time passed and the significant changes, we will have to have another working dust call on that one. The other document that is in ISG right now is COCO. And here, Alexei, who just came in, had an interesting idea, assigning a transport area AD as the responsible AD. And that's great, because we got really good feedback. Now, unfortunately, the authors have to find time to work on that feedback. Carlos is sitting in the back row there. Carlos has already generated a pull request, but we have to generate a new version. Maybe we can do this week. And then the normal process should continue. And as I mentioned, there is, of course, continuing work on congestion control. You may be aware that there is continuing work on TCP's congestion control. TCP was invented in the 70s, and its congestion control in the late 80s. So we don't expect CoAP to have one final congestion control solution. And indeed, there is another draft out there. And if we have time on Thursday, we will discuss that.
Mr. Holm, but just to mention, I think a long time ago, I also provided a GenArt review of this document, but I don't think that I ever got any replies for that, or have I missed it, or am I talking about the wrong document?
Carl is smiling knowingly in the background.
Carlos Gomez. So I think you're talking about the right document. And the point is, I guess that the updates that incorporate your feedback should be already in a pull request that's out there and should be the basis for the next version of the document, which will be 04. So we hope we can finally at some moment give more explicit response.
Thank you. Okay, so we will skip CORCON for now, and the slides are completely messed up. And we'll go to OSCOR. Yeah.
Hello. Okay, I'm Göran Selander. I'm going to give the update on OSCOR. So we're now in version 13 after ISD review. Okay, so we're now in version 13, and the main changes since the last meeting is the clarifications and the further details that was based on the ISD review and other post last call reviews. So in particular, in this new Appendix D, which was requested as the overview of the security properties of the protocol. We had already last meeting a first version of this appendix, and now when we reworked that, we made some reassessment about the protections of certain options. So we actually added protection to certain options and also added motivation for what options that are not protected as well. We also put some additional clarifications and simplifications of processing. And all this is, although not directly linked to specific review comments, are linked to the ISD review and the emphasis on the security properties and to how to analyze the security of the protocol. And if you look at the wiki, you find how we have addressed the different review comments. So more in detail, the observe option was previously an entirely outer option, meaning that it's unprotected for the purpose of a proxy being able to perform operations related to observe. And now we have an increased protection, so it's additionally an inner option, which enables the endpoints to verify each other's intent, in particular registration. So that has the effect that it simplifies the specification. We don't need to consider so much different proxy operations, but it takes less support for proxy processing. So that's one change that we made. Another change is that we have separated out the observed processing and also the blockwise processing from the processing in general, which simplifies the description and was appreciated by the implementers. A second option that's been changed is the no response option, the protection of the no response option, which is now essentially inner. It's based on a comment by Jim. We also have a new subsection on URI host port processing. And URI host port, that's essentially those options that's the only outer-only options remaining. All the others are end-to-end. And we explain in this option, in this section, why this option is only outer-only. And basically, we're targeting the default case where URI host port coincides with its default values and therefore are omitted which is, of course, favorable both from a privacy point of view and from an overhead point of view. But it's essentially the IP address and default port. And also we need to make the changes to this new Appendix D, resulting from these changes of the options. And then we already got comments from Martin Thompson on HTTP processing. Those were included in intermediary version. We have expanded on the COAP to COAP forwarding proxy section, bringing in information about forwarding from other parts of the document, so compiling that in one section. We added one new parameter to the security context. It's called ID context. And it's also added to the key derivation. And this parameter already existed as a message field that was transported in an OSCORE message. So we transport context information, which is used by the server to decide to retrieve the security context. And this is used both in group OSCORE and in 6-dish minimal security. And what the change was that we now introduced this as a parameter also in the security context and key derivation. So this can be applied in a common way for those two applications. And finally, we updated the deployment examples, test vectors, and references. So that sums up the changes in this version. And from our point of view as authors, our next steps is we have still some more review comments based on this new version from Jim, which we like to include and publish a new version. And that version we'd like to interrupt test as soon as possible. And we also would like to have an understanding if ISG is happy with these changes or if there is anything else missing. So that concludes the report of the state of this draft. Any questions or comments? And then the question goes to the chairs and the AD, what's the next steps from your point of view?
So I asked the usual question, who has read this version of the draft? 2. Okay, some people have written this version of the draft. Can be added to that list. So the point is, of course, this thing is currently procedurally stuck in the ISG, waiting for Eric Rescorla to clear his discuss. And he told us when we alerted him to the presence of dash 13 of this version, that the short time to the IETF would not be enough for review, and I can understand that. The procedurally, the next step is for Eric to review the draft after the IETF, and then we know where we are. But of course, as a working group, we also want to make sure that the changes we are doing during ISG processing are what the working group wants. So it's really important that we stay on the ball here. Alexei.
So yes, we talked quickly yesterday with authors, and I had a quick look in the morning. I didn't. I think it's lots of good changes, but you also moved some sections around, so it's not very easy to diff and see what exactly changed, because so it looks like a lot of stuff got deleted, a lot of stuff. So anyway, I think probably the best way is for me to do IETF last call, just to emphasize that there were changes to specific sections, HTTP description and proxies, access security considerations, and just, this can all happen in parallel while Eric and I are looking at the document. So I'll try to start it like this week. So this would be 2 weeks, but I think that shouldn't delay the document much further than that. Also give the working group opportunity to double check that changes were done. correctly.
Okay. Thank you.
Good. So the next item, the next OSCOR item is the group communication, and we should have a remote presenter, and I probably, Marco, can,
I can hear you. Can you hear and see me?
yes,
Okay. Hello, everyone. Yeah, this is just a quick update on the group version of OSCOR out of the latest updates. So next slide, please. So it was a major, though editorial revision, mostly based on the discussion following the London meeting, and of course to be aligned with the changes to the main OSCOR document that Joran mentioned. And starting from the terminology, we promised already in London to try to get rid of a lot of new terms that we introduced in this document, like multicaster or listener. And in fact, it worked just to reuse simply client and server as in co-op, or sender and recipient when more necessary from the actual message perspective. But we still needed to keep the concept of a group member never replying with a response to the request originator, still using the word server at the same time. So essentially we replaced the old pure listener terminology with silent server. Then following on the OSCOR security context, as Joran mentioned now, we are taking advantage of the ID context defined in the first place as part of the context in the main OSCOR document. So now we are just using it here to convey the group identifier of the OSCOR group. Next slide, please. For the COSI object as such, just minor adequation as to how the external AAD is formatted. So now you have a list of algorithms. So it's there that now you have to fit the identifier of the algorithm you use for signing outgoing messages. Then section 4 went through a real major rewriting, essentially for a better alignment with the new version of OSCOR. Now we are pointing at exact phases and steps of the message processing in OSCOR. So saying exactly that step, that changes, that is skipped, that doesn't happen anymore, and so on. So it should be much easier to read and follow. And in this respect, also, by the way, following another thing we checked at the London meeting, the group security context now is retrieved only based on the group identifier. So in that sense, the IP address possibly multicast associated to the group is out of scope for the actual retrieval. And then we add to the security consideration sections 2 new subsections. One essentially discussing how the same proof you have now in OSCOR holds here for the sake of uniqueness of key nonce under some hypotheses that are enforced by construction, especially uniqueness of group identifiers under the domain of the same group manager. And the section 7.3 about the fact that possible unlikely collisions of group identifiers do not impair security as such at all. Next slide, please. And back to possible collision of group identifiers again. We discussed about that in particular in Appendix C, where we discussed a possible encoding of group identifiers, also based on a good discussion in the list with ESCO about that. Thank you very much for your feedback. So before we were kind of seeing possible collisions of group identifiers as a big deal, while in the security considerations we discussed doesn't impair security at all. It is not a big deal in the first place, also from the processing point of view. So you might have some kind of ambiguity where trying to retrieve security context. You might just go for a trial and error until you pick up the right one. So discouraging a collision possibly through a convenient group ID size, sure, good thing to do as a good practice to discourage a collision, but it's not the end of the world if it happens. And finally, there was some minor adjustment in the appendix discussing the joining part and the possible retrieval of public keys from the group manager according to another draft in the ACE working group related to message form and to to perform this process. But a further more extensive list of updates is in the new appendix G1.2, by the way. Next slide, please. Yeah, implementation speaking, we plan also to start working on a version of this for California, building on the current OSCORE implementation already available. Otherwise, we had already available 2 implementations, one for OSRAM in C and one in ContiQS for two hardware platform, though they are aligned to an older version of the draft, essentially the one before adoption. So they possibly like to be, of course, aligned. Next slide, please. Yeah, just a quick final remark. There's, of course, a related activity to this document in the ACE working group describing how to join the OSCORE group using ACE. For the concern of this document, it's interesting just to point that we align the terminology as to remove a multicaster and listener from this document while keeping joint concept in that other document while avoiding confusion with the ACE word. And this should be the last slide. Yes. Thanks a lot.
Okay, comments and questions? So I have 2 questions that are kind of related. One is we are finishing other documents right now that do something with groups. And in particular, the resource directory has a way to handle groups. And one thing that is entirely unclear to me at this point is, does this fit together in any way? Is something redundant here? Should we fix one to work better with the other? Do you have an opinion on that? Does anybody else in this room have an opinion on that? Peter maybe have one. Jim may have one.
I'm Peter van der Stok. I have an opinion. There is a relation because there are groups, but if you look in great detail of all the aspects of this draft and the resource directory draft, I think some work maybe should be done.
Some work maybe should be done.
Yeah, should be done. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Jim Schott. I do not believe that there is any overlap in what these documents are doing, but I also have wondered for many times who is actually managing groups in the RD, because basically what you're looking at is if you have a third party managing the groups in the RD, that would basically be the same party would it be managing groups here. So talking about those two things as being the same is interesting, but the entity that's actually doing that management right now is in ACE, not here. So.
Okay, so Peter thinks something should be done, but he used the passive voice for that. I'm trying to find out who would be interested in looking at this and finding out what should be done and maybe even start doing it.
This is Peter van der Stok, a volunteer to collaborate.
Oh, great, wonderful. So we have one person who is not only interested, but actually wants to do work on this. We had other people like Jim and Michael and a few other nodding heads here. So what should we take down in the minutes as the people we pester to make progress on this? Yeah, can we take down Michael and Jim on this? Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, so that was one question. The other question is more on the procedural side. So it's most likely that the 3 documents that work together to do this will at some point be a cluster in the RFC editor queue. So what is the relative speed with which we are finishing these? What is our projection when we are done with this? Jim has an opinion on that?
Oh, I've got opinions on lots of things. I am not expecting the documents in ACE to go anyplace before next summer. The question is, how much does this document actually rely on those documents? Can it progress without them? Marco?
I think so.
I mean, other than terminology, I don't think there's anything blocking.
So using the OSCOR part of this in separation from what's being done in ACE requires some other form of managing the keys for the group, right? So the expected, no?
Well, there's a draft in ACE focusing on the actual joining of the group. Well, so far we have started handling possible rekeying in the group in the generic message draft.
I mean, if you're willing to do static configuration, the answer is no.
Okay. Yeah, you always can do key management with static configuration, but that's not always what you need. Okay.
Right, I understand. Okay. But I mean, it is doable today, even without the stuff in ACE being in existence.
Okay.
And I expect that to be reasonably well baked by the time we get it into the working group.
So we have a way to test this, and we even have ways to use it out there in the real world. Okay, that's good to know. So the next question is, when is this ready for working group last call? And before I ask that, who has read a recent version of this document? 1, 2, 3, 4. So who would be willing to send a review to the mailing list? Peter? Jim? Bill? Michael? Okay, there were some hands in the back. Could you send a review to the mailing list?
Joran Salander, could I ask the people who volunteered to please have a look at OSCOR first, since we're having that in an IETF last call now. And group OSCOR is very similar to OSCOR. It's essentially, I mean, if you have an implementation for OSCOR, you're ready to do group OSCOR. So if you would like to have a first look at that, that would be great. Thank you.
That's certainly a good idea. Okay, so I said before I asked when this is ready for I asked for reviewers. When do the authors believe is this ready for working class call? Are we done?
I think an interop test would be nice.
Okay.
But again, I think since if you have an OSCOR implementation, you're very close to have one of these. So that's not necessarily, but possible. Nice to have.
So is the current draft the implementation draft for such an interop, or do we have to wait for one more revision to do that?
It's fine. Thank you. We could wait for the update on OSCOR. This draft will not change, but since it's dependent on OSCOR, it might be worth to wait for the update that should come very soon anyway. The review comments that we just got for version 13 and possibly the comments that we get in IETF last call.
Okay. So the plan would be, I mean, it's summer anyway, so there's nothing really happening right now, but the plan would be to get the OSCOR version to a near approved state, or hopefully to an improved state. And then based on that, run another interop and get OSCOR GroupCom to version plus call. Okay, great, wonderful. So anything else we want to do on OSCOR?
So you put the echo request tag in this cluster, although it's not necessarily bound to that, but we haven't discussed that draft. It would be good if people could review it. There is no dependence. The echo request tag. So the third, you put the third.
Right, yes.
In the cluster. And we haven't discussed that, but I think it would be good to get more reviews on that one.
Yes.
Which is also sort of security for co-op related.
Right. Yeah, that was on the agenda last time, I think, but there wasn't an update, so we didn't put it on the agenda. There is an update, okay. So who has read a recent version of the request tag? Okay, 2, 3. The echo request tag draft. We should just call it ERT. Okay, so this was like 6 hands, and yeah, having reviews would be great. Okay, so yeah, do you want to say one sentence about what happened this morning on ad hoc?
Okay, so we've updated ad hoc, and which is then what we think is a natural key exchange protocol for OSCOR because it's built on CBOR, COSI, and COAP. And ad hoc, and the main update is we have a formal verification of the last version, and we have a reduction of message sizes. That's sort of the updates. And have a look at the slides. Feel free to come back with comments or questions. So, but on the message sizes, we're now doing half the message size of STLS for raw public keys, and a third of the total number of bytes for pre-shared keys authenticated diffie-hellman. So that's the type of optimizations we've made.
So is the current version an implementation draft that you would carry to an interop, or are we waiting for another version on that?
I would ask John if he has any views on that, but we haven't had any much comments on this version, so I would probably wait a little. But from an optimization point of view and from a security point of view, I think we are close. I mean, the security is not necessary for the implementation, but for finalizing the protocol, I think we are close.
Okay. So we do one review cycle and then either get a new version or decide it's good as it is, and then declare it as an implementation draft. Maybe we want to use it together with the other stuff in OSCOR interrupts. Okay, thank you. Okay, that should finish the OSCOR part. We're actually 10 minutes ahead of schedule in our slightly confused agenda right now. Oops. So the next one on the agenda is RD. No, we cannot do Cochrane yet because one person is missing. So that will be a little bit later. So let's talk about resource directory and resource directory DNSSD. Peter, I think you wanted to talk to those slides.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the resource directory and about all the modifications and improvements which have been done with respect to the former two versions, actually. What we have been done and what we should look at in detail is that there is an Appendix B and D done in the resource directory, which explains in more detail how you go from a reference to a target URI and how you can use that and how that is stored in the RD and how you can actually do the lookup. It is all nicely explained with examples. For example, it tells you where the scheme authority part, where that is used and how that is prefixed to the relative reference. It tells you about RFC 8288 and 6619 and its difference and how we have made rules to make sure that we do not go into conflicts. And it tells you also about the host relation, how that fits into the whole thing. I have made, from one of the examples, I've made a little excerpt. So we have here a get go up 2001 to well-known core, and there is this base URI, which is just mentioned after the get. And from the base URI, you then construct, you do a resolution from the relative reference, which you see the T within the brackets, and that then goes to the go up, so you get the authority scheme before, and then you get the T, which then is the target URI that you will produce. And so the whole thing is going through in the Appendix B and explains where it is used. Also, you see, for example, we have here a relative anchor, and also that is resolved against the base URI, and you get then the one with preceded with the same short-term memory. Yeah. So you see how the anchor is constructed there. The other point is that the link context, which is used in the relation attributes, how that is also formed exactly because there were some conflicts between the two drafts about how that is done. The further we have the resource lookup, and usually the resource always returns an absolute target. And the absolute target is constructed from the registration base URI, which actually is the authority and the scheme and the authority, from which we have then postfixed the relative reference. Please read the appendix. Well, we have a registration base URI, and that is known, that's the base URI with the well-known core. I should not say stripped, but constructed, and that one is used to get the absolute URI, which you see with the lookup. And further, the base URI, when you do with third-party registration, is the one which can be defined with the base is parameter in the registration. Yeah. So that one is stored in the resource directory, the registration base URI, and in the lookup, the one is prefixed to the relative reference, and then you get the URI out, and otherwise you get an absolute reference returned if there was an absolute reference there. Also, the RFC 6090 and RFC 8288 I mentioned. The anchor is used as okay in the 6690. I can see it. That is anchor is used as a base URI in which the relative target is down, but in 8288 the anchor is not actually used for the resolution. So that's a difference. And also in the 69 without anchor, the context is the target URI, is the path stripped off. Otherwise, the context is given by the base URI. So what we have been trying to do is to make sure that those conflicts do not appear in the resource directory, and that we have some rules to make sure that you do not cut into problems here. Yeah. Then other improvements to the RD text. So we have this domain, which was very confusing because it's used elsewhere as well quite a lot, and we called it sector, but we maintained the DIS parameter because of backward compatibility. The con, which we called context, which is not in context, because that's something else, we have changed it to base, and this is actually the base URI, and that is the registration base URI. Yeah. No, not happy, Michael?
Oh, no, I'm
sorry.
Sorry, I was not thinking.
Okay. Well, they have to use some resource types have been introduced. The simple registration has been not changed, but it has been reworded, and also the examples, etc., have been done more correctly. The lookup, we show how the resolved references are actually returned. And the LT, that is the lifetime, is not exposed in the lookup anymore because it gives ambiguous results. Is it the lifetime as we specified, or is it the lifetime which is still left, or is it the lifetime which has been confused, consumed, left that out? And the upgrade of the registration has been clarified. I think that is about all. To do. Many thanks for the reviews, especially Jim. Very much appreciated them. We still have reviews probably which come in, which we should react. We still have some ambiguous text left and right, so we are working on that. But we think that we are really ready for working group last fall, because we think that the most structural things have been solved and that it's more about clarifications and getting the terminology correct, etc. And we think that is typically working group last fall comments. Thank you very much.
Jim Schott. I don't think I'm going to be able to do a good job of producing working group last call documents until we have an interop event first. An interop event.
I see.
We need to, at least Christian and I and somebody else need to get together and see if it does what it's supposed to do.
That's such a good idea that we actually did it yesterday and the day before. No, it wasn't a formal interop event, but we actually did start a little bit of interop testing. We'll continue it this week. Now, what happened to me was I had a student write this thing, and he handed something in that I didn't take seriously because it's 700 lines of code. But it's the implementation. So if you want to write a resource directory implementation, it's not that complicated.
Oh, I've got one, and that's how come I managed to produce so many errors.
The working group. If we come up with an interop event, we should be able to carry a few implementations to that. So who in this room has a resource directory implementation? So Matthias, is there a chance that will be updated to the current version? As time permits, says
It is a good exercise.
So we have some 4 or 5 implementations we could carry together. One thing that we forgot to put on the slides, on the announcement slides, is that there is this project called F-Interop that is helping put together online interops of IETF protocols. And so maybe we can set up something with them in the September timeframe to actually do this interop. So would that be a convenient time frame for people? Or? I'm seeing slow nodding. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Kerry Lynn. I'm presenting this draft on behalf of the other co-authors. We're hoping to perhaps gather at least one more co-author from the DNSSD working group. So we'll see how that goes. I'm going to beat Carson to the punch and ask how many people have read this proposal. Okay, pretty small number. So you might be interested to know what we're doing, but first we could talk about the why. Simply, the core charter states that we should interoperate with DNS discovery in some manner. And so it seems to me that at least to the level of RESTful APIs, we should be able to export those from the RD into DNS, and this is called DNS-based service discovery. The use cases, I think the primary one will be in mixed environments where you have primarily HTTP clients talking to CoAP servers through a middle box, which is called a cross proxy. I worked on a standard several years ago, which is actually the genesis of this proposal, was Zigbee Smart Energy Profile. That is now an IEEE standard, and it's beginning to be deployed in parts in Hawaii and California for solar energy. We do anticipate that there's going to be more of these environments over time. The granularity of DNSSD is larger, so it allows you to basically search for services, services such as who provides temperature, who provides light. And so once you have a collection of instances that support that service, you can then drill into them and find out whether this is one that you're interested in. And it also could potentially be used for the chicken and egg problem of locating RDs in the first place. So how many people in this room understand how DNS works? Okay, many more hands. So I think I can explain DNSSD to you in about 2 minutes or less. Essentially, the trick is that pointer records are used as a method of discovering instances of I'll use the term class. So if you're looking for printers, for example, the DNS database that you're querying will have several pointer records that have pointer records named IPP, for example, which is the Internet Printing Protocol. You'll get back, when you do the query for IPP pointer, you'll get back a list of instances, which will then populate view. Mac users are very familiar with this when they're adding printers and so forth. Those instance names then correspond to a serve, an SRV, and a text record pair. The SRV record will give you the host name and the port where that service can be located. The text record will give you additional information about that service in the form of key equals value pairs. So if it's a color printer, for example, you would see information about that in the text record. So the SRV record provides you with a host name. You would resolve the host name finally to an A or quad A record. And what I should say is that the service type that you're searching for when you do the pointer search actually is a stand-in for the protocol that you're using to communicate with that service. So it's a bit like a scheme in a URI in that sense, that it encodes a lot of information in a simple token. So you know a priori the kinds of services that you're searching for, and you have the protocol that will just talk to those services. Again, I think we're used to talking about resources in REST. I think if you squint, you can see that anything that exposes a RESTful API basically fits the definition of a service, and so can be exported into DNSSD. Finally, service instance names are of the type, are of the form instance, service type, and domain. So we talk about a couple of new meta value or metadata attributes that should be included if you're interested in doing this export. EXP is currently defined in this draft as a binary because we only anticipate right now exporting to the DNSSD to the DNS directory. But potentially in the future, we could be exporting resource directory information to other types of directories as well. So that's TBD. Instance name, as we define it here, is thought to be globally unique across all devices of this type in the given sector. But maybe that constraint is not easily met, so that's something for us to visit. Where you're using RT and IF, which are already defined in other RFCs or proposals. I'll talk about RT in a minute, but it could be that we need to generate service types from the RT. So let's talk about how these mappings work. So INS becomes the instance part of the DNSSD service name. As I said, resource type may have to be converted from the existing resource type into something that conforms to the format that's used by DNSSD. Probably just say something about that format here. service types, there's a registry in IANA. The guiding RFC is 6335. These tokens are, they basically conform to the LDH syntax, so they can be comprised of letters, digits, or hyphens, and they're 15 characters in length. So if you look at the RT registry right now, some of those resource types exceed that length limit, and currently all of them seem to have periods. So we can't just do a one-to-one, can't just use resource types as they're currently defined in the resource type registry. So an agent that's going off and doing this export, maybe there's some sort of heuristic that can be used, replace the periods with hyphens or something along those lines. So that's some work that's needs to be discussed in the group. The link to the RESTful API would be put into the text record, as would be the interface description, any other attributes that you feel are necessary to export. So here's an example. It's kind of color coded to show how an agent might do this mapping. So it's basically the process kicks off by querying the resource directory or using another method to basically find. So you can see as part of the query string, we're looking for this EXP attribute. So again, that's set if you want your information to be exported. We get back a sample record here from this node FD1234. It says that it's got a temperature sensor available at that path. The instance name is set to indoor temp. And so then you can see what the resulting resource records are. Anywhere where you see an ellipsis there, that's just a stand-in for example.com. So I just deleted that to shorten it up a little bit. But you can see this mapping. So in particular, what began life as the resource type, has to be sort of massaged, to fit into the resource type that is acceptable to, or the service type that's acceptable to DNSSD. I think one other thing comes up too, and that is whether we use sort of like a hierarchy and search like a particular SDO like OIC for subtypes, or whether that's just one long flat string. And as we discussed in the draft, it can be done one of two ways. So I think one advantage of doing it this way, where the main type is OIC or some other SDO name, is that token could potentially be used to express more about your protocol binding. So for example, if you've got multiple bindings in your definitions, WebSockets or other, if you've got a number of different ways to express the bindings, you could encode it in the type and then encode the actual function that you're providing in the subtype. So I think that's it. Questions? I should say too that I think this draft this version is pretty readable from here out. I'm going to be spending a lot more cycles on this, and we'll be tracking changes and so forth as we go along. So the other thing I would ask is that you follow up any proposals or suggestions you have on the list, and we'll make sure we get those incorporated in the next version. And then the final thing I want to say is, following on to the interop for the resource directory, what I intend to do is to take a resource directory implementation and combine it with a DNSSD implementation to basically prove out this concept, within the next IETF cycle.
Okay, so Dave Taylor. So Stuart and I were having a little side conversation over here that maybe he's getting up to comment on the same thing about a question in the bottom part is around the area where you have, R-temperature and so on. And so my understanding from the discussion we're having is that that string right now must be IANA registered in order to be usable in an RR.
Yeah, I believe that's.
And so what do you proposing, given that RT values have a way to be vendor extensible? So this is a question about what you're proposing. This isn't a proposal.
This is Stuart Churchill. Let me jump in and clarify that. As this example is proposed right now, the underscore OIC is the service type that would have to be registered with IANA. The R-temperature is one of a nearly infinite list of subtypes of that. So once you've registered OIC with IANA, you're then free to create whatever collection of subtypes you want. And indeed, there isn't the same length limit on the subtypes. I am struck by the kind of irony that DNSSD was designed targeted to be for constrained devices, which is why it was very frugal with its use of a space in the packet. And we spent a lot of time debating how long identifiers needed to be and came to the conclusion that 15 characters was long enough that it wasn't a scarce namespace, so we weren't going to be fighting about allocating them, but short enough to still be efficient on the wire. And core, which is supposed to be targeted at the same constrained devices that DNSSD was, allows arbitrary length and very verbose resource types, which makes the packets much bigger than DNSSD packets.
I sometimes paraphrase Mark Twain and say, everyone's talking constraints, but no one's doing anything about it.
Okay, so thank you for the clarification, Stuart. So I think that the discussion is actually about the underscore OIC dot field. I think that the semantics of RT values is that a piece of code is not supposed to interpret dots as being hierarchy or something in there. And so the question is, if underscore OIC must be IANA registered, what's the process for deriving one from the other, and who does it at what point in the workflow?
It's a really good question. It could be up to the SDO, first of all, to decide whether they want to go with a hierarchical scheme like this.
Not all RTs are from SDOs. It is from OIC.
Yeah, so the Carsten Brummer. First, a general comment. We are increasingly seeing situations in where we have different IANA registries that need to be in sync on some registration activity that's going on. And on Thursday, I have a quick slide on a draft about proactive registration of content format numbers for media types. So that's a similar situation where we have a media type registry and a content format registry, and we'd rather keep them kind of in sync. And I'm saying kind of because it cannot be 100% because they are different registries, so there are different semantics. And that may be something how we can handle this here as well. Now, one question, if we take resource types which are defined in RFC 68690 and turn this into a hierarchical namespace, might be what's the hierarchy? And as Dave mentioned, it's not just SDOs that define these things. So what's our perception of that hierarchy? What's our guidance for how the hierarchy should be used? And I think that will require some thinking. We would then go ahead and do a delta to 6690, whether we do this in links JSON or in a separate draft, I don't know. That defines how exactly we plan to work with resource types in the future. And that might also, for instance, contain guidance that they have to fit into 78 bits and so on. So we can try to address that problem there as well. But of course, it's already there in the registry, so we cannot solve it, but we can just address it. If people have ideas of how that hierarchy should look like, this would be a good time to let the mailing list know.
Yeah, please comment on the mailing list. You know, in the worst case, this agent or whatever it does that does the the mechanical exporting from the RD into DNSSD would have to have heuristics for every RT that it encounters or groups of RTs, which would be obviously now at that point the thing starts looking like an application layer gateway, which is nasty. That's what we're trying to get rid of.
Stuart again. I just had a quick comment because Carsten brought up really important question of hierarchy. And when we were doing DNSSD, we gave that a lot of thought. And that was why we settled on this fairly limited hierarchy, that there are types and subtypes, but not an arbitrarily deep nested hierarchy. And the reason we came to that conclusion is, and this is my rule of thumb, engineers love hierarchy and you have to push back against that instinct. Hierarchy is useful when the software may wish to access that hierarchy at different points. So if I have an app that will show me temperature, it's looking for temperature sensors. If we could imagine I have an app that wants to find all devices made by Samsung, regardless of what that device does. It might be a washing machine, it might be a printer, it might be a thermostat, I don't care. If it's made by Samsung, I want to find it. I have a hard time imagining what that app would do that kettles and tumble dryers and printers have in common, that I'd want one app to control all of them. And that's what I find when you drill down on hierarchy and say, at how many levels would these groupings make sense, where I want this entire collection because they have something in common, you start to find that it's hard to find things that have that in common.
I'm just gonna, before Karsten.
Yes.
I just want to mention that we may have an additional problem. I mean, in the early days, CoAP was only bound to UDP, right? But now we're talking about TCP bindings, WebSocket bindings, all the rest of that. So all that has to be expressed in the service instance name, because at the end of the day, you have to have a complete stack that's going to talk to the server on the other side. So an additional thing we might want to think about is potentially expanding the number of labels that can be in the service part from just simply TCP and UDP to other tokens that might express more complete bindings. Otherwise, we're going to have to, try to fit it into the service type label somehow. So that's just another thought. It's a related. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for letting me in front again. So I just want to second Stuart's comment on unconstrained hierarchy. So if you want to see the textbook example for unconstrained hierarchy going bizarre, it's ASN1 object identifiers.
Matthias Kovac, Siemens. I want to raise an issue that I tried to discuss on the mailing list. It's about the ins attribute. So with this draft, we now have a good definition of it, which is good so far. So we know what it means, how it should be used. Originally, it was, I think, proposed by Zach, and it was used to distinguish resources within the same endpoint that have the same resource type. So I have some temperature resource type, and I want to say that, yeah, this resource is for indoors and the other one is for outdoors. Or I have a car with 4 tire pressure sensors. This is, which one is it? And with this redefinition for the instance from DNSSD, we lost this capability. And also others started to use the ins attribute for their purposes because it wasn't so well defined before. So overall, I think we have to rethink a bit the discovery framework that we started to build with the link attributes, because it's a bit fragile now and people started to use it. There was no definition, we lost a meaning. So yeah, and there was not much feedback on the mailing list. So I don't know how to address this and how to get some folks together to design something.
So sorry, Matthias, but I thought that the point you were making on the mailing list was originally INS was considered to be unique just within the scope of a given endpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Is that your point?
Yeah, so that was, it was never that formally defined. It was more, that's back in the days when we implemented it and used it. And remember, I think it was part of the interface draft that has a long history, a lot of changes to it, and so on. So that was there and people started using it because it made sense. It solves a problem that is out there, and now it's gone. I think it's good that we now have a clear definition and it should be used for that because, yeah, it makes sense, but it leaves a gap. So I just want to point out that we might have a problem there because kind of the overall how to use web linking and these attributes for kind of the 80% of discovery cases, how to do that. So I know, for instance, other SDOs like Fairhair, they looked into the ins attribute. Now it has a different meaning. Yeah, so we should spend some time to work on that.
But I think, we're in a situation where people are, sort of using something before it's defined. And so then we have to sort of, post facto go back and change, make the definition fit with the use. The point is that if RD basically had a section and defined every one of these meta attributes that we anticipate using, then there would be like one source. But I think right now we're sort of defining these meta data attributes as we go along or find a need for them.
Yes, so the need has been there all along, and I'm not saying that you should change something in your draft or whatsoever. I said this is good, lock this in, and we are fine there.
Right.
But now we have to go back and fill the gap.
In other words, change existing implementations, or I'm
I
not really sure
think
what you're
the reason why there wasn't much resonance to your mailing list posting is that it's really messy to clean this up now. Nobody has a golden bullet here that will solve this. We will have to make some hard decisions here. And so some of the backwards compatibility will be lost.
I do want to make a general point that we're sort of mapping from a more free-form environment right now, more free-form namespaces. As Stuart said, there's like very, very few limits on any of the values of these meta types. So whereas DNSSD has very specific constraints, and those are spelled out in the draft. So that's another thing we'll have to grapple with, is whether we want to become a little more specific,
Yeah, so that's also fine. Then take this and define it how this looks like in web linking. That's all I'm saying. I don't think we have a problem with interoperability with people, what they implemented, because they didn't care and everyone implemented something different. So let's throw this away because it doesn't help interoperability anyway. So, but we have to give them something. So this would be the right way that it becomes interoperable.
Okay, thanks.
Before you sit down, Stuart Cheshire again. I had a question. I didn't understand the example you started off with. You said some people made temperature sensors where the instance name might be inside temperature or outside temperature. If I query a resource directory for temperature sensors and I get a list that says bedroom, kitchen, outdoors, that sounds like exactly what I want. I mean, anybody with an iPhone here, you tap the AirPrint button and you see the terminal room printer and you see the registration desk printer. You see a list of named entities that describe something about what their purpose is. So how is indoor temperature, outdoor temperature different to terminal room printer and registration desk printer? They both sound like instance names.
Maybe let's go to the car example. So you have 4 tire pressure sensors, and they are front left, front right, and so on. And they are defined within this endpoint, because you could also register a lot of cars, and then you have the front left and the front right a lot of times. Also, if you register your printers and you have a lot of bedroom printers, for some reason, you need kind of, okay, to whom does this printer belong? And then you get some notion what this meaning is. So it's a hierarchical meaning to identify really what service you are getting.
He's pointing out that you might have collisions in the instance namespace.
So how is that solved today? When you query the resource directory, if you've got 100 front lefts and 100 front rights, how does the resource directory tell you which is which?
So one thing is, I cannot answer this completely how people implemented that. One way that does the trick is that you have it scoped within the EP, and the EP has some other information like the location or the holder of the car and this. But this information to distinguish the overall group of these services is at that level. That's where it's annotated. So
is that written down somewhere? So somebody writing a client know what they have to do?
That's part of so it was written down, like the ideas of that were written down in the early versions of the interface draft and so on, and people started using that, and they got a good idea how this works. It's also used in web linking itself in some other ways. but it really points down to the problem that I want to raise, that, yeah, we started with all this, people started using it, and now we have to come together and actually, yeah, have a look at it again and then write it down so that everyone does it in the same way so that it becomes explicit.
Okay. So it sounds to me, if I'm understanding this right, the conclusion is if there's a standard place in the resource directory with some string to disambiguate the instances, then maybe you construct the DNS instance name from that standard string plus the ins.
Yeah.
And if resource directory doesn't have a way of differentiating instances, then maybe resource directory needs to add that, because otherwise it's not very useful.
Yeah.
Dave Taylor, different topic, although it's related to the 1-2 back. OCF doesn't use it, but I believe that RFC 6690 allows arbitrary URIs in an RT value, not just IANA assigned names. Did you look at how to map those?
In RT values, URIs?
Yep. Allowed in 6690, and you're talking about mapping link format. So is there a way to map them? Did you look at that?
I did not.
You should at least say something, even if you say, sorry, you can't map those.
Okay. Could you follow that up on the list? Because I'm sure it might get some comments. I'd be particularly interested to know whether anybody is using URIs today for RTs. It doesn't seem like there's much in the RT registry other than what OIC has put in there.
I wouldn't assume that. There may be people working on it that haven't gone public with what they're doing yet.
The point of using a UI there is.
Oh, sorry, Michael
that you
Koster, Samsung.
Don't have to register it. So we wouldn't see it in the registry if people were doing it.
Okay.
So there are two paths. Use the existing registries that allow you to construct unique URIs, or register an RT. Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerry. So I think it's really interesting because we are now seeing a number of things that are happening on top of CoAP that seem to flow together in interesting ways. So we had this semantic interoperability work over the weekend. We have the resource directory work. We have this DNSSD mapping, and it seems this is really a good time to put in some major fence posts on where we want this to go. Yeah, let's have that discussion on the mailing list. The next item on the agenda is probably rewinding to, because Yari just left, rewinding to CoreConf. And before I give, come to the front. This is such a nice animated slide. Too bad. We're using these Chromebooks today. Unfortunately, you cannot see what's on this slide. But what it was trying to say is the people who wanted to get rid of SNMP invented something called netconf. And that is based on XML as the serialization technique, that is based on SSH as the secure transport, and it's based on Yang as a way to do modeling that's slightly saner than W3C schema or something like that. So that's netconf. And that's a family of documents that work together. And more recently, people found out that maybe doing some of this over HTTP would be a good idea. So they invented another bundle of documents that are highly related, which are called RESTconf. And what they are doing is they're using HTTP as their way of getting data from A to B. They are using JSON as their serialization, but of course they can continue to use XML if that somebody really wants to do that. And they are using the same Yang models that are being used in netconf, modulo a few minor things that are just different between the XML-based protocol and the HTTP-based protocol. So that's what happened a while ago. And then we started something that we originally called CoreConf, but that name has kind of gotten lost, porting all this over into the constraint space. And instead of using XML or JSON, using CBOR to represent the Yang, using CoAP and mapping the RESTconf data types to ones that work well in CoAP, and that's the document that's called COMI. And a third thing, getting rid of the giant identifiers that come from using XML or JSON-based Yang and replacing them by SIDs. So again, we have a bundle of documents that can be used together, and we have been referring to this bundle as COMI. And that was really confusing because there's one document that's called COMI and there is a bundle that's called COMI. And also people didn't quite understand that this is just a continuation of the something.conf series. So when last month 3 people independently asked me, why the heck are you not calling this something.conf? We dug out this old name and said, okay, we're going to call it callconf to reduce the confusion. So that's the state of the hallway. I should add that these technologies, of course, don't have to be used in exactly those bundles. So, of course, you can use Yang CBOR with RESTconf. Yang CBOR works really great over HTTP. So it's not as clear-cut as this nice marketing slide here is suggesting. But for people to understand a certain kind of evolution or a certain kind of pairing and mixing and matching of things, it's probably a really good idea to name our part like the other two. So from netconf via RESTconf to callconf. And unless somebody in this room really objects to this renewed naming, we would like to go forward with that. Any comments on that? It's a non-technical change, but there was a thumbs up from the back row. Yeah, that was one of the voices that asked me why the heck are we not calling it something.conf. Okay, in that case,
thanks, Carsten. After this introduction, I think that I'm going to go pretty fast over the following slides. So this is an update of the work that we've been doing for the past couple of months. And I see that the table actually did not go really well here, but it doesn't matter. So basically, this is the status of the different drafts. And okay, half of the table you cannot see it, but the main drafts are the core Yang CBOR, core SID, and core COMI. And we have received so these are you see the versions of the respective drafts, and so the first 3 are now. I mean, we need to do some minor changes because we had some input on the mailing list, which we'll do in 1 week after the IETF, and then they're ready for last call, we'll put last call. Okay, so yeah, and that's the core conf thing. So here you can see the protocol stacks, which Carsten explained. So you can have them, for your to consult after if you wish, like the netconf, RESTconf, and coreconf. And what we have today, well, we have SID registry, an example SID registry that you can go and you can use today. That is on the website comi.space. There are already some modules that are there, so you can just read only if you're curious to go and see how it works. We have the existing implementations, so at least 2 that we know of, and 2 more that we have talked to some people on privately. So in Golang and in C, and on the interoperability side, we had already we had 3 hackathons. So the first one was like a virtual interop where we did some basic functionalities between the private implementations. The second one was the past hackathon where we were working on semantic interoperability over using Komai with the resource directory and the web of things, the things descriptions. And on this hackathon, actually, we started. So in the meantime, we published one reference implementation to the finterop platform. So you can go to this platform. Anyone here can go to this platform. It's pretty well documented. So you can download an agent. It forms like a VPN network. So you can really interact. You have a Komai server and a Komai client. So you can do this today if you wish. Yes, so this is what we did. And during this hackathon, actually, what we wanted to achieve was to start an open source Python implementation of a core conf client and server, starting by the client. This is what we started. So we provided some examples where you can have some basic co-op requests, and like start the finterop platform, connect to it, and run basic requests so that you can see how it works. What we wanted to do, actually, we wanted to go a little bit further down the road. So Cisco, they have open sourced a thing that is called the Yang Development Kit, YDK, that actually allows you to generate code based on the Yang module. So you have the Yang module, and then you can generate code in Python, in C, or in Go. And we wanted to, so what our goal is, and this will continue on for the next IETF, is to have a CoreConf client that uses this. So basically what you do is you generate your code, and then if you want to use netconf, it's already there. If you want to use RESTconf, it's already there, and we're adding CoreConf. So it works out of the box. And you have all the nodes that we took are on the Etherpad, and there is a GitHub repository for this. On the reviews of the document, so Yang CBOR document and the SID document were reviewed by 2 people from the NetNode working group, and they published some discussions and some suggestions. Some are quite minor, and we'll fix them, no problem. And there is one that's a little bit more significant, and it is related to the encoding of delta encoding. So to give you an example, what we have today in the, I see Peter that is very happy. So what we have is we really went down to having the most efficient representation that we can have on the wire, and that's what is it today, and it is the upper example. And in this example is, when we have the request, we have already the SID that can be used as the basis, as the point to which all deltas are calculated. So if here in this example we have, so this A5 is the encoding of 1721. So that's the example. And so here in the response, the delta SIDs are calculated relative to this entry point. So in order to get the absolute delta, you need to add 2 to this entry point. And one of the inputs that we received is that could be a little bit more confusing in some cases, and it would be really nice to have it explicitly in the payload. So that means that even though we have it here in the request, we have that we are requesting this this element, we can also include it once again in the payload. So this way we remove any ambiguity, any possible ambiguity. In terms of the cost that this change would cost us, of course we need to do some text additions, but the existing case is more compact, but it would require potentially a bit more complexity on the code, and it could lead to some ambiguities, as we said. The other point is, easier to debug, maybe a little bit more straightforward to process, given that we'll be, losing around 4 or 5 bytes just to add this this thing explicitly in the payload. Carsten.
Yeah, Carsten Bormann from the floor. I'd like to fix your wording a little bit. There was no ambiguity in the existing proposal, but we missed one requirement, which is the requirement that you can rip these payloads out of their context and still do something useful with them. And I think this is a pretty important requirement, and it's standing against, I have computed at 6 bytes per response for most real-world applications. It competes or raises against spending 6 bytes per response on something that is redundant when you do have the context. So I think that's an important or difficult decision in this space. If you look at the specific example you have on the slides, the first thing you would do is compress those ugly dates there, and you could save 3 times as much by doing that, and then you can spend 6 bytes on the debugging support. But I think in the IETF we often do not think enough about deployment issues. And this is one place where we got feedback from people who want to deploy this and say, we are going to have problems with our tools if you do it this way. So maybe we actually have to bear the cognitive dissonance of wasting 6 bytes and just make it simpler and more reliable to actually roll out this protocol. So as much as this pains me to do on one end, I think it's actually a pretty valid comment that came in there.
Dave Rodden, having worked on similar problems with other protocols I've worked on, where you basically your URI is setting a context and you want to take a chunk of the payload and save it off or give it to somebody else, and you've lost that. What we established was sort of copied over from some other protocols. We invented a tag that you could stick in here. Now I know this message with signatures and stuff, but we're assuming we're talking about I'm taking a snippet, so signatures and encryption out of the picture. So I've got a snippet and I want to hand somewhere or store it for later retrieval or whatever. We simply add a new attribute in there called self, borrowing from the other world where we borrow. So self was the URI of the context. And so when you need it, you provide the context. It's not always present. So on the wire, it doesn't exist because it's redundant. But if you ever store it or hand it to somebody, you add the context. That's how we solve the problem.
Yeah, this is Henk, and I think that's somehow similar. So why don't do /p for payload? You don't have to populate C. You can just get something from P if the payload is even in the, I don't know, fetch. Then
the example is a good example, but the same would apply to the fetch.
Yeah,
example.
I mean, so if you do a fetch on a static /p instead of /c resource or something, then the problem of redundancy goes away.
No, it's exactly the same problem.
Okay, then I'm maybe missing something.
Yeah, so that's actually very that's a good point, and I think that we'll probably need to discuss. I mean, I right now I cannot really grasp all the consequences that will come from adding this self. We need to talk this over. This one seems pretty straightforward, but if we are able to save 6 bytes over the air, then we need to evaluate.
Actually, what you just said, I already suggested on the mailing list, and yes, this can be done. I mean, if everybody does everything right, you can save that context together with the data. But we know how things actually work. So, I mean, starting from a Wireshark dissector to lots of places where these things will just turn up. You call curl and get some data somewhere and lost the context and so on. it's just really hard to make sure that this transformation always happens. And so it solves some of the problems, but not all of them. So yeah, I'd say, I think we still have to figure out some details there. But one other thing that might result from this change, I haven't fully checked this yet, is that the number of different media types we need goes down quite a bit. Because the media types mostly differ in how they accept context. And if we use less context from the outside, then probably the media types converge a little bit. And that may be another win.
Yeah, yeah. That's for the that's for the COMI document. The Yang to Seaboard would be more. Yeah. So that's a thing maybe if you wish to discuss on the mailing list, unless you feel pretty strong against it, or unless you you have other ideas, please go and write it to the mailing list. And I think that there is a thread already on the mailing list. So otherwise, we'll just go ahead and and do the change with this.
Yes, one comment, Laurent Toutin. Unconstrained device, we can use the second format. An unconstrained device, just our constraint network, just send the first one and use like a template, Seaboard template, to add the tag when we leave the network.
Nice, nice.
Okay, so that's good. So that's the conclusion. As I said, the Yang and Seaboard and the SID draft are ready to ship after this IETF, and of course after we have been apply these changes. And with application in RESTconf and CoreConf. We had 2 reviews from NetNode, and so we'll be asking for last call. Workgroup last call. Same thing is for COMI, and one of the things is that we would love to have 1 or 2 reviews from Core, where people are more knowledgeable about co-op and about these things. So one possible point is to start working with last call and ask for these reviews during that process. Yes, we have our action points for the next IETF, continue the hackathon, and go ahead with above for the Yang of things.
Yeah, so for a couple of IETFs, I think we have said we want to interrupt test this and we want to get more reviews. We now have more reviews. We have a little bit of interrupt testing, and the reviews will make us make a technical change. So we probably have to do another round of interrupt testing. But since this can be done online, we don't have to schedule a big event or so for something like this. So my hope would be that we should be able to do a working group last call during September of all these documents after the interrupt has been done. So that requires a little bit of pain from the people who have vacations in August. Sorry for the French people here. Yeah, then we should be done. So this is my perception of where we are with this.
This is Henk, basically coming from NetConf. It was a session before. So there's this notion of NetConf notif drafts, they're called. They're basically the transport part ripped out of the generic models, and then you can stick in to get netconf or restconf, and then the notion core conf could be another netconf notif draft. So maybe we have to align about this idea a little bit with the netconf people again, because we're talking about last call, and I told them this is basically done, so either be really fast about it and get it done, or we just doing it at some point later, I guess. So.
But we have the luxury of doing this outside of NetConf.
I know. I'm just highlighting what they do to be a little bit modular regarding with respect to transports, and they have their own I don't know, subgroup inside their group that is ascending to do some aspiring to do some binary stuff. So yeah, I think the chairs are aware of NetConf. I just wanted to create awareness here also. So maybe sync at least once.
My proposal would be to actually write this notif draft, which is really short and says, look there.
Props. But I check twice.
There may be a little bit more glue required to actually do this. And it would be good to discover this glue soon. So writing such a draft is probably a worthwhile exercise. But I wouldn't want to destabilize the well-ripened documents that we have there. At the moment.
This is what I think the very first thing I said. Get it done, or basically, later.
But good point that we should start work on that document. There's also another document in the CoreConf group that we haven't talked about, which is the equivalent of how it's called, Yang library. Yeah, so we probably want to do that one as well. We may not need to do it exactly on the same timelines, but we also probably should try to align this. So can you on the microphone quickly say whether NIMDA is damaging your document? The network management data store architecture, NIMDA, is that changing anything in your document?
Yeah, we'll need to align with the new version of the RESTCON Yang library for the transfer.
Good. So there's some actual work required there. So it makes sense to decouple the timelines.
But that the next IETF should be ready for maybe working with adoption. Michel, yet.
Yeah, I would like to thank again. I would highlight that the library, so the capability stuff, is somehow semantically different from all the flavors of data store trees they now have with NMDA, which is applied, running, startup, intended, something, a lot of those. So that's another problem scape than just the library of telling you, hi, I can do this, which is pretty much, I guess, a lot of simpler than all the other NMDA stuff that is the flavors of data stores. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And just to add on that point, I think that this could be the place for, for the Yang of things. These kind of discussions then can carry on where these two communities meet a little bit more, to say, okay, well, there is CoreConf and there are the other things that come from the NetConf from the Yang world, so that that we are discussing in a more how can I say it, in a more interactive fashion.
So do you want to talk about other things here, or maybe next IETF? Or?
It's yeah, I mean, we had a site meeting two IETFs ago, and we had around 30 participants from NetMod and from Core, and we gathered around and we discussed about all the possibilities that ComI at that time opens, and the use of Yang for the Internet of Things. And the idea was, of course, to see, okay, how these two communities where they can meet, so that we are not getting purely router-oriented technology and just try to fit in, and then they move on their ways, and they just ignore completely the IoT world, and so that there is this place of discussion. And once there is CoreConf, of course, then Yang modules will start being. Suddenly, they will be very, very, very easily portable and usable for IoT devices. So whenever there is a Yang module that needs to be developed for IoT, then that would be also some kind of a natural place to be discussed, because it's people that know Yang and know how to do this thing, and people that understand that, okay, well, these are not routers. There are some, let's be a little bit reasonable. So there is this place to place on which people can talk about and can design these models. So that would be, this is an idea to have this forum, this group eventually, the Yang of Things, And it seemed that it was there was a lot of interest at that time, and right now I think that we're getting to the point that that right now the protocols will be there, and we can start this discussion.
Yeah. So if the Yang of Things work grows, we probably don't want to continue to do this, all of this in this working group, and it really is operations and management at some point in time, and no longer applications. So it also makes sense to do that. But that's something that has to be discussed with ADs and moved into above and so on. So we have about -5 seconds in the current segment, but I would like to quickly bring up one thing. On Thursday, we will have one customer of CoAP quickly present how they are trying to use CoAP for DDoS detection and notification of DDoS events. And today, maybe Henk can say a few words about how CoAP might be used for Yang telemetry. And you have -42 seconds for that.
Hi, Henk, presenting. Yeah, this is a short introduction about concise Yang telemetry, which once was before called concise Yang push, but the term push went away. So there are now customized data stores or customized data source subscriptions, and well, terminology changes there a lot. So I used a term that is basically known by everyone. We are creating streams here. So next slide. Basically, there are two drafts being basically in working group last call now in NetConf, which is the data source subscription and the subscribe notifications. Notifications are the thing that you get typically with the standard Yang data store when something fails, it's control plane. But people thought like, well, we always wanted these SNMP traps back. Why not make it more useful for data value changes? And then they created subscribe notifications. So you can now build your data model-esque notifications and just subscribe to them. That's kind of very easy because you define them in the model and you subscribe to them at the end. You have a interval or you have on-chain stuff, and that's all nice. But the real interesting thing here is to make use of all the existing Yang modules, so the 2,000 of them, which are 1,000 at least are defined here in the IETF, and then subscribe to change of data node values of existing data store Yang modules. And that's the actual power here, because you leverage, as you like to say here, the power of Yang. And don't really have to redefine anything. And from that, you can create a binary telemetry using CBOR, also Yang model CBOR, basically. If you closely look at it, the COMO design enables you to do kind of easy CoAP-based subscriptions. For example, subscriptions have filters. Sometimes you don't want to, next slide, please, maybe. Yeah, sometimes you have filters, and you don't want to have the complete data module value changes, but just a subtree of it. And subtrees can be quite easily identified now because it's a SID. So you do an CoAP observe, probably reliable in some interval on a SID, and ta-da, you have a subscription on with the subtree filter expression. And there's nothing as simple as that in RESTconf and NetConf, and that's pretty appropriate for something that is about a constrained node environment. There's something more to it. So subscription IDs are created by the server typically. So if you observe something, the response if the successful is in subscription ID. So back then, the notifications were just control plane. We had the /s resource. But now I think, and with the consent of Michelle, who is not in this room. Oh, hi. Sorry. We are now entertaining the idea of populating the S resource with keys that are basically the subscription IDs created by the server. And then you post a subscription RPC input with a ton of details that I'm not going to explain here right now. And then you get a subscription ID back and just look at S subscription ID and observe that. So it's your individual created subscription on data store node value changes, and ta-da, binary telemetry on change. or periodically if it's a counter. You probably don't want to change subscriptions on packet counters, I guess. So there's a lot of flexibility here, especially using post and iPatch. And we're also considering eliminating the complexity of XPath expressions. Because subtree is easy, XPath is hard. And XPath today is, I think, somehow JSON translation just natively translated into CBOR. And it's kind of, I don't know, a little bit too much maybe. So we're exploring the idea of using a specific set of map of SIDs with conditions to substitute the very complex XPath expression that is now being able to express in CBOR, but maybe we can do it a little bit simpler. So this is basically going on right now. It's all called concise Yang telemetry. It's an 0.0 draft at the moment, and we got a lot of support by the people who actually do create Yang data store subscriptions, and Yang subscribe notifications. I think so. That's that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think it's important to see that this stuff is being used, and it's actually used by stuff that's really moving fast, and we need to put our foot on the...
Yeah, well, one note, as soon as it is easy to create binary telemetry streams of messages or bundled messages, people think, oh, cool, this is event data. Now I'll use it for security. Because I want online, live visible security events. And so we took that into account a little bit and saying, okay, this is typically operations and management, but please expect to be used in the security area. So resilient subscription and visibility of change is a thing. And we are working on that. So this will be going on the actual solution space and also security consideration, of course. But highlighting that this is, because as soon as this was put out, it was like, cool, security events based on Yang. I want that. So yeah, just highlighting.
Okay, thank you. So we have about 9 minutes left. I think that's about the amount we need for Yari's presentation. Well, the only thing is I need to find that. Where is that? Can you start talking while I find it?
Yes, I remember what
I was
about to say. Yeah, so 9 minutes is probably just perfect. So we're talking about the dev URNs, and these, as a reminder, of course, are to identify devices for various purposes, whether in files or protocol fields, and they support the sort of the usual things, MAC addresses and so on. But also we have added a couple of versions ago some more free format identifiers. Is this the newest version, by the way?
It's the version I
have. So in version 02, this draft largely has been done for a while, but we wanted to see if we should actually integrate some of the other things that we've seen in the industry. And one of the things that I did look into recently was the OMA lightweight machine-to-machine specifications. They actually specify a couple of sub-branches of this dev URN called OS and OPS for organization serial numbers and organization product and serial number. So I folded those in because I actually felt that it would be important that, like, there's one place that actually says that, you know, here are the different sub-branches, and then the syntaxes would actually be somewhat compatible and aligned. There's some changes that I had to do because of that. So we had recently introduced this org, sort of organization freeform device identifier, which used colon, and these things from OMA used dash. So I changed that in the org, and maybe that's okay because the org is a recent innovation of ours and not widely done yet. Perhaps I don't know. You can tell me otherwise. So that's what in the new what is in the new version, and just to highlight sort of what this results in. And the idea is that if you need, your organization needs some kind of serial numbers or whatever, private numbers, then we have a branch or a set of branches to do that. And there's actually 3 levels. Like, one is totally free format, one is assuming serial numbers in an organization, and one is serial number and product or product type. So I think it's a reasonable set of things to have for general purpose use. But there are some questions here. So first of all, this is largely my own opinion that we should actually try to do some alignment here and put things in the same place. It's not the intent to hijack any other work, and I want to impact other people's specifications unless they want us to. But this is like my proposal that we should actually do this, and asking this community now, or you guys here, whether that makes sense. And there are also more detailed questions. So the OMA thing actually uses the OUI identifiers from IEEE. And we had previously used the PEN numbers, which is the IANA private enterprise numbers. And there's a question like, which one should we use or both? And should we change this, like what the guys did in OMA? A change might be painful for them, or if there's no usage of their current thing yet, then a change might be okay. And then we do the best design and aligned design. But on a totally free from any complications, I would personally rather use PEN numbers because I can get them easily without any cost, whereas OUIs actually cost real money, as if I've understood the IEEE process correctly. And there's some details that we may not have to go into right now, but I'll just point to that, like the dash versus colon thing, and then there's a % sign. I think Ari was arguing a while ago to me that the % sign might be a problem from a CNML perspective if these identifiers are used there. The % sign is used in the OMA spec. So that's the proposal in front of you, and this is otherwise done. But there's whether we should integrate with this other stuff is the question. And please comment.
I'm here. I can speak a bit on what we do in OMA, and basically for the second question, it's a no-brainer. I think PEN numbers makes more sense. It's for free, and why not?
Do you have an understanding of how much usage of the current format exists today?
So I know that, as I already relayed before with you, at least for us, email is the most common, URN with email. I don't know other members, I mean, maybe Paro can pitch in also, or other OMA members can pitch in, which is the most common. Either way, the unification sounds reasonable to me.
And also sort of a request for you guys who will work there or attend their proceedings. Could you bring this up with them as well? That, okay, we could do this if that makes sense to you guys and is acceptable. But of course, not against their wishes.
Yeah, actually, since we are quite a few of us from OMA here, we could maybe during this week have a short meeting, all of us, and then, yeah.
Carrie Lynn, so I'm guessing that when you use the term private, you're not talking about privacy. I'm just wondering whether or not this proposal intersects at all with this mania that's happening sort of like down the hall about not using hardware identifiers anywhere for any purpose, if they can be associated with, anything in the real world.
That's a good question, and it's been discussed previously, and the document does have some words about that. I think the view is that people who use these kinds of things need to be aware, but there are some usage cases where it actually does make sense, and we want to enable those use cases and documentation. Like if I, in my own network, have a file that has device identifiers, it's probably okay.
So maybe I'll give a bit more details on the present issue. So in the CNML specification, we recommend dev URNs as one convenient way of giving the names prefixes, because they can easily then generate globally unique names. And so far, the dev URNs have been fully compatible on their character set with the relatively constrained set of CNML. So that's why I'm a bit concerned of adding % sign that would make only subset compatible.
Yeah, and just for clarification, so the reason that it's being added is that, if I import this, other sub-identifiers from the OMA spec here unchanged, then that draws in the present syntax. But we can make changes, and I'm suggesting changes on other aspects. And it sort of critically depends on if there's usage of this, then we can't make much changes. But if there's not, we should make the best design possible, which might include not doing the person sign.
Sounds good, and I think good agenda point for the OMA coordination meeting.
Hi, Padu here. Yes, I'm just getting awake 3:15 in the morning. Thanks for waking me up. It is more or less like, there are different formats which we are using for the endpoint name, and we are converging certain things like what Amy mentioned about EMEA and other things which is evolving for 3GPP, like external ID is another one, which we try to fall back on NAI, which is again referenced here. My suggestion is like if we can, whatever IETF, if we can bring it under one umbrella and generalize here with one format, then the evolution would be simpler as we move forward for the next versions in OMA. That's must be easier, but we could discuss this offline as well.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else, or we're done?
So,
thanks.
Yeah, what's the next step?
I think the next step is that we have to coordinate with the OMA folks and figure out what the best approach. I mean, we could certainly throw out, the addition from the draft and just publish what we have. I think it would be valuable if we could reach an aligned proposal, and then things would be more understandable from people's point of view going forward. So we're going to try and report back and then revise draft accordingly. And hopefully that means like it's going to be a perfect self-contained document that can be taken to working group last call.
Thank you. Okay, we are out of time for today. So we have spillage of about 6 minutes or so for the meeting on Thursday, which is pretty good. And see you all on Thursday.